Welcome to Solved, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning Best of Left podcast, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Today, we're diving into all the news they don't want you to know, uncovering the real reasons behind Trump's tariffs and why SignalGate wasn't just an example of astonishingly poor judgment, as some would have you believe. But first, an interactive personality quiz. Y'all ready?
Oh boy.
Question 1. When you just now heard me speak of how they don't want you to hear things, did you A, assume you knew who they were, B, wonder who they were, or C, question my credibility for referring in a menacing way to some amorphous they? Mark your answers. Question 2. When just now you heard me say that we'd be uncovering the real reasons behind Trump's tariffs, did you A, get excited about the impending revelation of secret knowledge, B, wonder why we would have access to any kind of trustworthy secret knowledge, or C, question our credibility for suggesting that we have secret knowledge? Mark your answers. Question 3. When just now you heard me say, referring to SignalGate, that some would have you believe that it was merely poor judgment, did you A, take away that those calling it poor judgment are intentionally trying to mislead the public for potentially nefarious reasons, B, wonder why apparent critics of Trump's cabinet would also be trying to mislead about their handling of signal messages, or C, question why we would presume to know the underlying motives of people making comments and why we would assume ill intent when the very useful Hanlon's razor states, never ascribe to malice that which can adequately be explained by incompetence. Mark your answers. So now you can add up your score. For each A answer, give yourself 2 points. For each B answer, give yourself 1 point. And for each C answer, give yourself a pat on the back. The higher your score, the more danger you're in of coming to believe things that aren't true and ultimately risking becoming a conspiracy theorist who believes in baseless conspiracies. How did everyone do?
This is like Teen Magazine, but for adult political nerds.
That's what I was going for.
Actually, Teen Vogue is the reality of that. But
Oh, that's true. Yeah, they're good.
I got D on all my answers because I assumed there was something going on. The way you were talking is not very Jay-like at all. Like, that's weird. So I thought you were doing a bit, which you were doing a bit, but
which you are.
an informative bit.
Yeah, I tried. For anyone concerned, just a note that it is still okay to believe in true conspiracy theories, like that capitalism drives people and corporations to maximize profit at the expense of almost everything else, including the livable environment, human decency, and democracy. So if you believe in that conspiracy theory, that's still okay. Now, if you're worried about your relatively high score on our 1 to 6 scale, here's a little jingle that will help put you on the right path.
If what you believe to be true is not true, how would you know? If you can't answer that, then you might believe a conspiracy theory. Oh, you're trapped in a fortress of confirmation bias. That's true of us all to some degree. But is there any evidence anywhere in the world that would make you not believe? Oh.
I hoped the jingles would come up in this episode. Hooray. The media manipulation jingles, to be specific.
I'm always keen to play our media manipulation jingles any chance I get. So now, with all of that said, We are going to dive into some news stories that have some mainstream takes and some lesser known theories. Our point is not to show that the mainstream is always wrong or that fringe theories are always right. The point is that it's extremely important to get a wide range of perspectives so that it's possible to understand a wider range of possible explanations for events in the world rather than fall into a sort of tunnel vision, whether that tunnel vision be mainstream or fringe. Now, everyone ready? So we're starting with a bit of pattern recognition. Now, again, pattern recognition, it's critical skill for media and political literacy, but is also a mechanism that fuels conspiratorial thinking if it manages to spin out of control. So we shall proceed with caution. We're starting today with a Vox article. There's a pattern in Trump's power grabs. And starting with the classic, what the article admits is almost cliche, the poem from Nazi Germany about, who the Nazis came for first, second, and third. This article points out there's a reason why the Nazis targeted the groups in Niemöller's list. German politics made them particularly easy to demonize. They were either vulnerable minorities, Jews, or politically controversial with the German mainstream, communists, socialists, and trade unionists. And it says that Nazis pitched power grabs as efforts to address the alleged threat posed by menaces like Judeo-Bolshevism, which is just communism in old-time words, harnessing the power of bigotry and political polarization. And it draws the parallel saying that when engaging in unlawful or boundary-pushing behavior, the Trump administration has typically gone after targets who are either highly polarizing or unpopular. The idea is to politicize basic civil liberties questions, to turn a defense of the rule of law into either a defense of widely hated groups or else an ordinary matter of partisan politics.
I like the way this was framed because it's very obvious the reason they're going after the people they're going after now is because, like, who could argue that we want MS-13 gang members or Trendewagwa gang members in the country? And it's been very frustrating to watch the capitulation where the people that are against this behavior, where they're just deporting people without any kind of due process, will always catch themselves and say, we don't want people who've done it the right way or people who have come across or legal residents and all that. But that's missing the point completely. There's a reason we have rules set up the way we have them set up. Like Jeffrey Dahmer should have had a trial. The Dylan Roof kid that did the South Carolina church shooting, he should have a trial. Like these people, just because you think you know that they did it, and maybe they did, and maybe they did it on camera, there still should be a trial. No one person should be the decider of who is a criminal and who is not a criminal. And we have ceded that territory when we just say, well, obviously, like the ones that are gang members, well, how do you know? Because they're not getting a trial, they're not allowed. But once you cede that ground, then it's on to the next, where they start deporting American citizens and saying, well, they're not citizens because there's no due process. And like, how do you know? Who do you prove it? And you just let it up to the decider, the Judge Dreads of it all. The cruelest people in the world are the ones making the decision on who's bad and who's good.
Yeah. And look, no matter what, as you said, even if you did it on camera, innocent until proven guilty is sort of our whole thing. And the administration saying right now, oh, we have evidence. No one should take that at face value. And no one should take that in face value with the terrorists after 9/11. That was a whole thing. Some of those people who are detained like still haven't had a trial. So there is a history, unfortunately, of America being okay with stripping people of their due process and just rolling with it because they said they're the baddies. I mean, you say you don't trust the government, but you trust them in this case. Okay. And I'm saying that, of course, to to Trump supporters. But and this article mentions that the similar feeling of all of this to the environment right after 9/11 is so deeply familiar. And I have been feeling that, but until I read this article, I hadn't really like put that all together. And back then it was, well, do you support terrorists? Obviously, you must support terrorists if you're not in favor of bombing the shit out of the Middle East. Like, you un-American asshole, right? Like, we've been here before. That's not that long ago, which is maybe more unnerving, but it is now on a kind of industrial scale, I guess, is the difference.
Exactly. And because it's not just that this is similar to after 9/11, it's that what we did after 9/11 paved the way for where we are now.
And they're calling these people terrorists. So they're not calling them just gang. They are saying they're terrorists because that word only means people we don't like now.
Mm-hmm. When I was doing research for the last LGBT episode that we had, one of the things that was being talked about.
You mean
was
on the Best of Left podcast, Erin?
Oh, yeah. The Best of the Left podcast.
Name drop that here on
The
Salt.
award-winning Best of Left podcast. Available anywhere you get your podcast.
One of the things that is interesting to me was just in talking about Germany and how things changed when the regime took over. The homosexual pushback wasn't because of new legislation. It was the burden of proof. So, prior to the regime taking over, they wanted physical evidence. And then afterwards, hearsay could be enough. You touching someone's back could be enough. So it really kind of devolved from any kind of legal standing. That strikes me today of like the accusations that are going on without the evidence, without it being presented, without us going through. Let's just like, you could just be accused of this now and face the ramifications as if that is true. And that is not a situation that we want to be in, because as you can see, things escalate. It might be people without documentation initially, then it becomes people with documentation, but XYZ excuse. I mean, it slowly devolves, and I think that's something that we really need to be paying attention to.
To Erin's point, in this article, it mentions you got to pay attention to what Stephen Miller, basically the Joseph Goebbels of this administration, gets mad about. And that's the finger wagging, how dare you, or do you support terrorism, and just call it like, we don't have enough time to get rid of these people because then you don't have any sovereignty, you don't have a country, this constant threat. And makes it sound super scary, make it sound imminent, makes it sound like your children are going to die if we leave these people here. And all that sounds really scary, and it's probably compelling, but you could prove it, especially if it's as dangerous and they're as obviously villainous and evil. It wouldn't take much to prove it at all, but they don't want to because they know they're just demonizing a group of people and they want to get rid of them.
I mean, it's already proven the fact that they're doing this, because some of these people, the justification is, well, they have tattoos. Okay. The immigration officers prior to this administration had evaluated a fair number of these people and not had an issue with their tattoos, but suddenly now they're controversial and, show that they're a gang member. Like, they don't have anything to hang this on. And so they are instead doing what always fucking happens and trying to use women and children as the justification for this whole thing. So don't look over here. We don't have any proof, but don't look at that. That's not the issue. Aren't you worried about your women and children getting killed and raped? That bullshit is such a playbook that has gone on forever. It was very prominent during Jim Crow and previously to that. And now it's being used to justify deporting people without any justification whatsoever and avoiding our legal system entirely. I mean, that's sick. And like, women should be upset about that.
And, as we've been saying, like, they start with the most vulnerable and sort of work their way up. Let's not forget that the entire concept of a Democrat is actually on that list. They've been sowing those seeds for years. So You start with immigrants in general being demonized and gang members in particular, anyone who they can think to or even imagine to call a terrorist, etc. But then there's also the partisan angle, because the sort of the bar for hating someone based on partisanship is actually much lower than the bar to hate someone based on their actual actions, like real terrorists or real criminals, that sort of thing. So the article points out that, quote, the Trump administration's rhetoric doesn't just attempt to link their opponents in general to gang members and terrorists. They also attempt to link judges and other nonpartisan authorities to Democrats. Caroline Levitt referred to the judge who weighed in on the legality of the El Salvador deportations as a Democrat activist. And it goes on, the idea here is to assimilate a question of basic legal principles into a familiar partisan script, Democrats versus Republicans. And by invoking the polarizing power of partisan politics, they portray what is really a fundamental clash over the rule of law as yet another spat between two parties. So, it's not just people's hatred for marginalized communities, but also our hatred for each other that's being used to convince people that abuses of power are justified. It's clever. I'll give them that.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I guess to go with cleverness would be the fact that their opinion is shared by the minority of people. But when you look at the framing, it'll almost be as if anything oppositional to this thought, to the actions that they're taking, is the minority view, which is completely disconnected from the reality, but serves their argument and serves the divisiveness of Democrat versus Republicans, because now it feels like there are more Republicans, more conservatives that are supporting these actions, that are happy with these actions, than what is actually the reality on the ground. And that's discouraging to people as well. Like, it's hard to drive voter turnout when you're like feeling overwhelmed by the other side.
To connect this to like the conspiracy thinking that Jay brought up at the beginning of the episode, it was what was kind of frustrating about the whole Russia thing in the first Trump administration. It kind of painted this outside force creating this partisan divide, as opposed to this partisan divide always existing. And I think the corollary to that is like the Jewish puppet masters that are used from anti-Semites to make it seem like Jewish people are pulling these strings and separating us. You don't need any outside actors for us to have divides inside right now. Like the duality of the party system, plus all the money incentives that are running basically both party, like it creates a partisan machine by itself. There doesn't need to be an outside actor. There's no conspiracy of Vladimir Putin's making Republicans do this, and there's no George Soros making Democrats do this. Partisanship is a pretty natural thing in this country, especially in the way that it's set up in a black-white racial binary. We have a lot of divides that we have to overcome, and it is very easy to fall into those divides in these kind of situations where one side's evil, one side's good, one side's trying to kill your children, one side is doing X, Y, and Z. There's no need for a conspiracy thought because partisanship is so natural to America and almost at its extreme endpoint at the moment.
I do think that those natural divides are being exploited, right?
Oh,
like,
sure.
I don't think anyone's creating them. They're definitely already there. We already have all these fractures. Then there are people who want to fuel the flames and make it even worse. And of course, social media does that all on its own without even having the bad actors involved. But that's certainly what they're trying to do, right?
And I worry, I have no doubt that the Russian government has tried to exploit these divides, and I have no doubt that there are outside actors doing this. I think it just takes away from the fact that those divisions exist.
Yeah.
And when you focus on Putin and you can put all your eggs in that basket, you don't have to worry about, hey, let's figure out why are we so divided right now here? Why is it so easy to do that? Why can a bot farm turn people into raving lunatics?
Right. Going back to how the administration is responding to like genuine questions about law and order, I was reminded of the horrific video I saw of Marjorie Taylor Greene like screaming at a reporter from the UK when asked about SignalGate, right? They just like asked her reaction to it and she lost her damn mind. I mean, like, she just flipped it around, you know, like, what about your country? You should go back to your country and worry about your immigration crisis. And and it's like, why don't you just answer the question? Like, I'm always kind of fascinated by this. Like, even with Stephen Miller, like, you don't have an answer. You're just going to go to the complete misdirection and like try to make people forget that anyone's asking about the rule of law. And it sort of, that's where I get sort of comforted, oddly, is like, oh, it is stupidity. Like, they're not super good at this. Like, they didn't plan to have a response ready for why we're not actually engaging in due process. Like, they're just trying to say, look over here, look over here. So it's very childish. And I, you know, look, I've been disappointed by the American public many, many times, obviously, but I do kind of hope that their tactic here is less effective because people do know that we have rules and due process. And so, like, it is very, very glaringly obvious that they don't have any plan. They never did. They don't even have a fake answer to that question.
That clip is amazing too, because there's such a, you know, a media criticism moment for that clip. She says that about, you know, go back to England to this reporter, and she's like, next question. Then she asks an American reporter, and that reporter says, I'd like to ask her question. Like, can you answer that question? And it works so well because, like Amanda said, they don't have an answer. That she deflected immediately.
She deflected and said, what about? And
she never answered because they don't have an answer, because it has nothing to do with that reporter being from the UK. They can't answer.
But again, just to defend them a little bit, it's not that they don't have an answer and that they didn't like take the time to make up an answer. It's that there is no answer. There's no legitimate answer for most of the things they're doing. And so when they get caught, you got to feel kind of bad for them because, like, oh, that's you got caught in your own trap of lies, and now you're being asked to explain yourself, which is impossible. And anyone being asked to do something that's impossible while put on the spot with cameras on them is, you know, that's a sad situation.
Yeah, I don't feel bad for
defending the indefensible. It's tough work.
I also have to think that, like, on a psyche note, like, it's also a little bit of like, who are you? Like, who are you to ask me? Like,
dressing them down.
And I mean, I think she displays that a little bit as you go up the chain. I'm sure you see that even more, but like the audacity, and like, especially with Trump, when you surround yourself with yes people who are like, this is the greatest fucking thing. And like, people then stop doing that. Like, of course it's oh, no. I'm so sorry. Did you forget how we do this? Like, I tell you, and you say that a boy, like, that's how this works.
Yeah, and that's Trump was asked about tariffs the other day, and he's like, "That's a stupid question." Okay, you're fucking crashing global markets, but mea culpa. Like, sorry, I asked. Like, Jesus Christ.
Speaking of crashing international markets and not being able to defend it with any sort of rationality, we are moving on to the debate over tariffs. You'll recall from the top of the show when I stressed the importance of getting a wide range of perspectives to avoid falling into a sort of tunnel vision. Well, it didn't take more than a skim of the headline of this next article to know that they had gone wrong at some point. The Atlantic published, "There is only one way to make sense of the tariffs." And I was like, well, I know that's not true, so let's see what your argument is. They make the argument that is the most mainstream take on Trump's tariffs that I have seen anyway. And it's summed up basically this way. It says, the most fitting analysis for this moment, however, does not come from an economist or a financial researcher. It comes from the screenwriter William Goldman, who pithily captured his industry's lack of foresight with one of the most famous aphorisms in Hollywood history. Nobody knows anything. You're not going to find a better 3-word summary of the Trump tariffs than that. And so the author of that article does go on to do a perfectly good job of illustrating that no one in power can make a rational argument for the tariffs because there is no rational answer, and then sums up Trump's style as being forever transactional, which we also know, and says, quote, "The end game here is that there is no end game, only the infinite game of power and leverage." So all of these are fine points, but that's still not the only way to understand the tariffs. And besides, when has the public ever done well by taking Trump's actions at face value? Like just assuming he's a buffoon and not worrying what might be underneath it has not served us well generally.
I didn't think they were wrong necessarily, but I agreed that I feel like the headline was throwaway at best. I think we, as best of left producers, have a benefit of just like hearing things from so many different sources that we get a lot of the different takes on it. So going into this, I had already listened to a bunch of takes on tariffs to then read that article, and I was like, yeah, I would have swiped right past it. But here we are discussing it.
Only to say they're wrong.
Yeah. I'm just giving you a little hard time. Jay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I bring it up as a counterpoint, right? This is a cautionary tale, as we so often have when referring to the Atlantic magazine. So yeah, swiping past that article brings us to an alternative perspective that is not necessarily in conflict with the mainstream view, but additive to it. So Mother Jones wrote the article, "Trump's tariffs give him a new way to dole out reward and punishment." And it says, "If Trump is willing to hurt the economy, he must be getting something he wants even more in return. That thing is power. With tariffs, Trump is poised to trade a strong economy for one run on loyalty and retribution. Trump, a president who rules like a mob boss while claiming vast new powers, is transforming the government into a tool of reward and punishment." Now that, I'll admit that sounds a bit conspiratorial. And aside from all of the evidence of the past decade that Trump enjoys unchecked power more than basically anything, like besides that, what evidence is there that Trump's love of tariffs is anything more than his own unique style of trying to help American manufacturing jobs return?
Yeah.
I just want all the perspectives to be out there.
I really enjoyed this article because this has been my framing of his tariff insanity. I mean, it's very clear that he thinks that simply by having a huge impact, that makes him powerful and AKA good, like just by having an impact. And he has no sense of like positive or negative actions. It's just about, did I cause something to happen? And so far, he has cared about how his core supporters feel about him, but the tariffs like might be his shift towards letting that go, because he only cared about him because he knew he needed them to get elected. Now, he doesn't really talk about his poll numbers much anymore. You notice? Like, it's not his main focus. Like, does he care? I don't know. You could argue maybe, but like, it's not his main focus anymore. And what he needs now is solidification that he is all powerful. And so, like, with a stroke of his pen, he can send the world into chaos, like, which he did. And he's like proving that every day, how powerful he is. And of course, it's not him, it's the power of America. The US influence and the US market's influence over the world is what is powerful. He just happens to be behind the wheel right now, and he's abusing it. So I am kind of hoping that he is overplaying his hand here because he thinks he is a king, but he's not. It's only been 3 months. And like, while our checks and balances are incredibly weak, they're not gone completely. And Congress is now finally, because it's money, Republicans and, Rand Paul are like standing up to some degree and saying, maybe you can't go this far without congressional intervention. Like, we'll see what happens. I'm not the most hopeful person, but I'm kind of hoping he is delusional enough to think that he is completely protected when he is actually not.
I think the two articles go together so well, because if you take out the the Atlantic title, like this is the one reason. It's not the one reason, but it is. He's a stupid man who also wants power. He's very ignorant and he wants power. He's probably doing it for the Mother Jones article reason, and his explanations for it fit the Atlantic reason. The explanations don't make any sense because they don't, of course, they don't make any sense. And also, even if everyone in the administration fully knew that the reason it's being done is so that countries have to come directly to Trump to negotiate everything, no one's going to say that in the news because, like Amanda said, he's not actually a king. And if they start talking that way, that won't be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a consolidation of power. It is showing that the presidency does have an enormous amount of power. And that is partly because Democrats and Republicans in Congress and apparently the Supreme Court have decided that, yeah, the presidency, maybe they can do a lot more than any one person ever should be able to do. And I've seen it said a couple different places that if we do get through this, the number one thing we have to do is make sure that no one person has this much power ever again. Because based on a whim or based on years of wanting to be the most special boy in charge of the economy, no one should be able to say, on Wednesday night, we put in tariffs, 100% tariffs on some countries, on China specifically, on just everywhere, because I want to. That is not an acceptable way to govern anything, let alone a country.
I think what the scary part of me is like looking at all of this. One, like just talking about the fact that Joe Biden and the Democrats had the opportunity to put some checks and balances in place and did not. And I think that needs to be in conversation because that's exactly what I'm afraid of. After Trump, like who puts the guardrails up? Who pushes and makes those so that we don't come back to this place? We don't slide backwards. Like I'm a little afraid of what that looks like because I'm not hearing the Joe Biden part a lot in conversation. I'm just hearing like we're kind of acting as if this event wasn't built on at least 50 years of active work like
Yeah,
that Democrats participated in.
absolutely.
That's one thing. The second thing, I'm really worried about what an off-ramp for these tariffs looks like, especially in regards to China. Now, it was announced today that they're retaliating with tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
That is not going to be good for us. And I do think that Trump in his mind is going to get them to a level that's going to make China cower. This is speculation completely, but I do think in his mind,
Oh yeah, he
I am
believes
going to
that.
wield the power. United States is stronger. We're going to make China come to their knees. And I don't think that's the reality.
Mhm.
So what does an off-ramp look like for Trump to back off some of these tariffs with China? Does it mean that like we're going to have to get a third party involved to negotiate some of this?
Yeah, they call it a trade war for a reason, right? Like
Yeah.
it's messy and causes unbelievable chaos. Yeah.
And there are people who are going to benefit. Like, unfortunately, the middle class is going to probably be decimated by this if it continues for long enough that we're going to see businesses closing. But unfortunately, there are going to be people who still profit or at least are okay that can withstand through a few years of this. But that's not the reality for most families.
I think the off ramp for this doesn't involve Trump, really. I think it involves the rest of the world deciding that America is not a
Mhm.
reliable partner and fading out, relying on us, which will be bad for us, but is also something that we on the left have realized, and why there's this, like Sean Fain, head of the United Auto Workers Union, is in favor of this, and the theory behind him being in favor of it does make sense. Like we've been talking about this for a long time. The Rust Belt exists because industry has been hollowed out and jobs have been shipped overseas, and yeah, we do want jobs back here. This is not a program to do that. This is not what this is about. But they can connect to that because it's a real thing and a real problem that we have. And global trade, shipping things all across the world, is contributing to climate change. There's a lot of reasons why there should be limitations on global trade, and a lot of reasons why tariffs in and of themselves aren't bad tools. But who's wielding the tool right now? Like a hammer is great for hammering a nail, but you don't want a toddler running around with a hammer after they've had a shot of whiskey. Like, that's what it seems like right now with these tariffs. And the off ramp does seem to be that America won't be the center of the world anymore, which for good or for ill, long term, one thing, but short term, we're going to suffer a lot. And like
Yeah.
Erin said, the people who are going to suffer are not the people who were standing behind Trump at the inauguration. They're going to all
No, that'll be fine.
be great. They'll probably be trillionaires out of this somehow, some way. Like, that's
Yep.
probably what's going to happen. And there will be, I don't know, there were breadlines in the Great Depression, whatever the equivalent of that is now. I feel like that's what's coming, and it's depressing to say, but the off-ramp for us is a long way away if this man can't have his ego fed by other countries. I don't think other countries are necessarily willing to play ball anymore.
No, and I mean, to that point, Deon, I think our credibility, like both of us probably in our research are stumbling upon active cases of other countries noting that America is not a good partner. And it's not just because Donald Trump is in the White House. This is going to have long-term effects of our relationships, even when we get a Democratic president.
Yeah, because
mean-
the state of our politics is so
Yeah, like we allowed that, like he got legally elected into
Mhm.
the presidency, and to trust the American people that we're gonna, like, yes, we have representatives, but also we are a country that people make up. So like the trust in American people to make good decisions that align with partnerships and agreements that we have globally.
To be fair, there has been a lot of doubt about the American people for a long time.
You're right.
I
You're
mean,
right. This isn't
I think
this
it's like-
isn't new. It's just enhanced, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just intensified.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's attributed to Churchill, but it might be one of those quotes that's not real about how the American people can always be trusted to make the right decision after exhausting all other options.
yeah, yeah.
You know, that's that is not a new phenomenon. But yeah, I mean, I agree that it's certainly ramped up now more than ever. I just wanted to not leave the point hanging because I facetiously asked, about the evidence for Trump wanting to use tariffs simply to wield his power. I also wanted to bring in a quote from a Republican from Montana. The article says, even those close to Trump see his trade for what it is. And then quoting the Republican, tariffs are a tool the president enjoys because it's personal power. Representative Ryan Zinke, Republican of Montana, who served in Trump's first term cabinet, told HuffPost Tuesday, continuing from Zinke, it's personal. He doesn't have to go through Congress. He can exercise personal power, end quote. Like, people who know him. When they're willing to speak honestly about him, they say all the same stuff that observers can tell just by watching. He's clearly obsessed with personal power, not having to go through any degree of checks and balances, not having to depend on any other branch of government. He just wants to be the king that he declared himself to be. And it's not that confusing.
Yep.
I like the part where it mentions not going through Congress as if that's deterring him from other stuff he's doing. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
there's plenty of stuff that should be mitigated by Congress
Right.
that's not
and
being.
we're talking about libertarians on the last episode, and I'm watching yesterday Rand Paul throwing a fit on the floor of the House because he's calling Trump a tyrant, right? I think what killed me is he starts talking about checks and balances and how he wants to live in a democratic republic and, wants to have branches of government that keep everything in line, that he doesn't want one person to make all the rules. And I'm thinking, like, only just now, because it's taxes, you're having a fit. But for the last 3 months, while, just as Erin said, they're doing everything else by avoiding Congress and just usurping that power, pretty quiet on the matter, right? So it's ridiculous, but I get, it always comes to this. It's like there's a line and you never know what it's going to be for Republicans and in this case, libertarians. And the line is apparently Trump, basically hiking taxes, which is what it effectively comes down to. And that is disappointing and frustrating. I guess I'm glad there's a line. I mean, I guess I'll take that to some degree.
Yeah, disappointing and frustrating, not to mention completely predictable.
Yeah, exactly. It has somehow gotten some Republicans, not a lot, but we'll see what happens, to talk about their power as members of Congress, Congress's power. That conversation was not happening in any way, shape, or form prior to this. So again, like silver linings to some degree. But I wanted to touch on, this isn't an article we did for our reading, but it was very, very good. And I think that it's applicable to our discussion today. There's a guy who's an economist, Brent Neiman, and he worked under the Biden administration and wrote a paper that apparently the Trump administration recently cited and completely wildly misunderstood, because obviously he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. The Trump administration used my paper to defend tariffs. Here's everything they got wrong, right? But the article is actually just a good explainer on why this is all ridiculous. And he goes through layers of being like, okay, let's say that the things he's saying are true. Even in that case, this is still a bad idea, and goes through this kind of analysis, and it's written plainly and not in economic jargon. So there's a line in the article we're discussing that says his pitch to voters in each of his campaigns was that he would get a better trade deal with every country, but a better deal for whom? The op-ed by Brent Neiman gets a little bit into that in a way that I hadn't heard framed this well in other places. Trade imbalances between two countries can emerge for many reasons that have nothing to do with protectionism. Americans spend more on clothing made in Sri Lanka than Sri Lankans spend on American pharmaceuticals and gas turbines. So what? That pattern reflects differences in natural resources, comparative advantage, and developmental levels. The deficit numbers don't suggest, let alone prove, unfair competition. There are some reasonable arguments in favor of reducing the overall trade deficit, such as to reduce risk from our debt, but these arguments don't apply country by country. The Nobel laureate Robert Solow explained why when he quipped, "I have a chronic deficit with my barber who doesn't buy a darned thing from me." Trump does not really understand tariffs. There are all sorts of reasons that he's doing this and whatever, but for decades, he seems to not understand what a trade deficit is, let alone what tariffs are and what they do. So there is stupidity here. I don't want to, yes, it is about wild obsession with power and trying to put your fingers on the scales and all of that. But he's also not very intelligent. And the people around him seem to enjoy the chaos he's causing because that serves their end. The people around him are the ones that want to drive us into a state where people feel helpless and can't fight back. So they're going to let this happen, even if they're smarter and realize that this isn't quote unquote good.
I think this goes directly into the Trump rationale. Yes, he's dumb. Yes, he wants it for personal power. And yes, he's misunderstanding what a tariff is, but it works for his purposes.
Mm-hmm.
It explains his psychology perfectly because he keeps saying that it's a tax on these countries when no matter how many people explain it, how simply, how clearly, how easily, it's not a tax on the country. It's a tax on the people buying the product. He doesn't understand that. And the reason he thinks that trade deficits are inherently bad and that we're being taken advantage of is the same reason he doesn't pay people who do work for him, because they're suckers. And every time you pay somebody, you lost. It wasn't a transaction of mutual good for mutual good. It was one guy got over on you because he got the money at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he thinks about everything. And I don't think it's too complicated. I don't think he's a very complicated person. I think the explanations of people trying to explain his actions are ridiculous and complicated for no reason. He's a simple man.
Yeah, the zero-sum lens, which is another thing this economist points out. This all makes sense because when he makes sales, whether of Trump University courses or Trump branded cryptocurrency, he says he's usually taking advantage of the buyer.
Yep.
That's how he sees the world.
And that's why bankruptcy is not a big deal to him, because he didn't pay. I'm out. I didn't have to pay anybody. I won. I went bankrupt because I'm a good businessman. I didn't pay anybody.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. So The article does go into more detail than we are going into about how exactly tariffs get used as power broker chips, that by the very nature of them, if a country or an individual company wants a better deal than the huge tariff that Trump slaps on them, they have to go to Trump personally. So you could imagine a world in which Trump is acting with no personal interest in mind and no desire for power. He's really just trying to help the economy. And he's still creating a scenario in which he is getting power that you would then argue he doesn't want. But like, what do people do when they have power, whether they actually seeked it out or not? But the article also explains that economies where the rules aren't applied equally, like an economy run on tariffs, personal relationships, and favors, which is the inevitable outcome of setting up that dynamic, are inevitably worse than ones where rules are just stable and fair. So if you're leaning towards, well, I'm going to give them a chance and maybe this will end up better for us, just know that we have tried this. We know how tariffs work. And in the big scope, the economy run that way will be worse across the board. The only people for whom it might be better are those who make personal deals with Trump by catering to his ego, by giving him some sort of benefit in return, enriching him in some way, or empowering him in some way. That's not going to be good across the board. And that just creates an economy where those who are cozy with power benefit and those who are on the outs don't. And quick tip, most people are going to be on the outs. Authoritarian governments don't tend to be friendly with lots of countries and lots of people and lots of corporations across the board.
And if you're on the inside, you may not stay.
You really, really may not stay. Yeah, traditionally, people who are on the inside of authoritarian governments last a little while and then get murdered. We might not be to that point yet, but like, it's paying protection money, right? There's a whole separate article I read. I think the headline was, "There is no amount of money that will protect you from Trump," because the way protection money works is once you're paying, you can never stop paying, and they can always raise the price. And if you ever stop paying or just fall out of favor, then everything you feared might happen to you, attacks on your company, lawsuits, using the power of the government to come after your corporation personally, like that will happen the moment you stop paying, whether literally or figuratively. Now, this next section, I think, is about as conspiratorial as we're going to get today. You don't have to ascribe every element of this list to Trump, accusing him of knowingly doing all of these things. It's just good to be aware that this information is out there and that aspiring authoritarian leaders know about it. So this is the 10 reasons authoritarian leaders deliberately crash their own economy while attempting full overthrow of democracy. This is written by @HumanBeingHuman on Bluesky and went a little viral or spread enough that I came across it. So a quick list here. Number 1, it weakens the middle class. A strong middle class is essential for democracy. By destroying economic stability, authoritarian leaders eliminate a key opposition force that demands accountability. Number 2, create a dependency on the state. Economic collapse forces people to rely on government assistance, making them more susceptible to control and propaganda. Number 3, destroy private businesses and strengthen crony capitalism. By wrecking the economy, independent businesses struggle while loyalist and state-controlled enterprises thrive, ensuring economic power remains in the hands of the regime. Now, pause here for a moment to go back to the previous article highlighting Trump's past actions toward favored and disfavored corporations. That article says, quote, In unconstitutional executive orders, Trump has hamstrung the economic fortunes of law firms that have in some way crossed him, a threat to conform, as Paul Weiss and Scotton did, or face the wrath of the government. Trump targeted the mergers of companies he disliked in his first term, and large firms already fear a repeat of this political interference. Sensing the danger, billionaires behind the world's biggest corporations were among the first to obey in advance. You know what it reminds me of is how we've talked about this not that long ago, how like Fox News commentators will lie so much that they will claim in legal briefings that they shouldn't be trusted. They're like, you can't sue me because no one should believe what I say, right? But Fox Business doesn't do that because they don't have the confidence to lie to people about their money. And that's what this is. Like, watch the people whose money is on the line. They know how Trump works. They're capitulating in advance to protect their investment because they know he will go after them.
I think it's infuriating because, like, we have so little power that watching people who could actually sway or have influence just kneel down. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic. Like, I do think that there are things that we could do. There are resistance and there are movements and people have power. But just as a normal everyday citizen looking at law firms that are
Yeah.
cowering to him, that literally have the legal backing to make arguments, to put him in court, whatever it may be, right? Like, they have that power and they're just not going to use it. Like,
There does
they
seem
are
to be
going to
at
go
least
along with it.
one firm and a bunch of
Yes,
signatories
yeah.
now. But you're right. For a long time, it was like, are they just all gonna capitulate? Geez, like the universities are. And we had the discussion before we published Solved in a pre-solved show about what was going to happen, right? Like, look for the people who are just going to kneel down. And I got to say, even though we had that conversation and we looked at all these examples of history, I really thought it wouldn't be this glaringly sad. And I thought people would have more backbone. Apparently not.
Well, I mean, I think the shocking was like without being asked, right? There are certain people who have folded without any kind of pressure being applied to them.
Yeah. In
That
advance.
is scary. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the thing about this list is just that he was already doing a lot of these things. And then the tariffs and the markets going wild happened. But again, this is my little tiny seeds of hope. I'm like, you are already doing this. So you can't exactly crash the market and then say, well, now we have to get rid of all this stuff because we don't have the money, quote unquote. Like, that was kind of already happening. And so I guess that's my only little holdout, is that the case for doing further damage as a result of the market crashing is not as strong as it would be if he wasn't already doing a lot of this stuff.
Continuing the list, it does get worse. Number 4, provoke chaos to justify emergency powers. Economic turmoil creates social unrest, which authoritarian leaders can use as a pretext to implement martial law, suspend elections, or consolidate authority. And quick note that Trump did issue an executive order, was it on the first day, seeking a report that would justify his use of the Insurrection Act. So
Yeah.
he's definitely looking ahead to that one. Number 5, dismantle democratic institutions. Economic collapse makes it easier to defund independent media, universities, and watchdog institutions that would otherwise challenge authoritarian rule, which is sort of what Amanda's pointing to. And it's just a nice dovetail effect. They were going to do that anyway, and then they're going to crash the economy. And then be like, well, it's not even a debate anymore. Like, we just have to defund those things. Continuing, number 6, weaponize scarcity. Limited resources allow the regime to punish enemies and reward loyalists, making economic survival contingent on political obedience. Like, if he implemented tariffs and could hand out exclusions for certain companies, like, you can dole out benefits that way. But if you really put the screws to people and make it so that it's not just can they scrape by or thrive, but if it's a question of survival, that becomes a very different scenario. Number 7, suppress protests through hardship. Kind of on the same note, when people are struggling just to survive, they have less energy and resources to organize resistance or demand change. There's always, I mean, number 8's a classic: blame external enemies. When you can collapse your own economy and then blame everyone other than yourself, and that just stokes nationalism and like gives authoritarians more power, which I think just goes to the fallibility of the human mind. Like, how in the world does that work? But I absolutely believe that it does, at least on some people. Number 9, facilitate corrupt wealth extraction. Again, classic. By crashing the economy, those in power can buy distressed assets at bargain prices, launder money, and consolidate personal wealth while the general population suffers. I mean, Trump did say that it's going to be a great time to get rich, to which we only slightly edited that it's a great time to already be rich and get richer. And then finally, number 10, eliminate electoral competition. Economic distress can be manipulated to discredit political opponents, restrict access to fair elections, and make it easier to control voting through financial coercion. Now, again, we're not saying that he had all of that in mind when unilaterally pushing the world toward potentially crippling recession, but those might be some of the results anyway.
I don't think he had any of that in mind personally, whatever you think about him. But I think every single one of those points is just who he is as a person. That's just how he operates. Yeah. And that's just, he's like the prototype or fits the blueprint of a dictator. That's the authoritarian like personality type. That's just him. He does that stuff. The conspiracy-ish part becomes, this time around, he has people that do want to do those things. And maybe it's a conspiracy or maybe it's not. But also, Project 2025 exists. They wrote it all down. It's written down. It's not written down in this 10-point bullet point format, but over the course of Project 2025, this is the result. This is what they want. Now, they want it for a Christian worldview that clearly Trump could care less about. And at some point, being on the inner circle, one of those two ideologies will win out because Trump doesn't want a Christian country, as far as I can tell. But that's what's happening. These people that are behind him do have this idea that these 10 points are a good way to completely consolidate power into a king or a Caesar or whatever Caesarism, what they were calling it. So they do want this, and this is a good way to do it. And whether Trump planned it or didn't plan it, I think is completely irrelevant because this is just going to be the result.
I think that it reminds me of the sort of question of the age for people on the left of like whether Trump is a puppet of Vladimir Putin. And what I think is actually more reasonable is that he doesn't have to be a puppet because they just agree on everything. Yep. It doesn't have to be coercion. It doesn't have to be compromise. It doesn't have to be the P-tape. It's just they actually believe the same things and want the same things.
Yeah, they're naturally aligned.
They're naturally aligned. Dictators naturally align with each other. They support each other, just like democratic countries naturally align and try to support each other in the same way. So like Trump doing everything that is in line with authoritarianism or in line with protecting Russia. I mean, we haven't even mentioned that Russia was not on the list of countries to have the tariffs applied to them.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that he's doing that because Putin has leverage over him. He just actually is ideologically aligned with Putin. So they're going to go along together. Next up, SignalGate. This is the one where Trump cabinet officials used Signal rather than official government communication systems to plan an illegal attack on Yemen that killed many civilians, after also including the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, who broke the story on the grounds of a breach of national security. So here's one take. Jacobin wrote the article, "Democrats have learned absolutely nothing from defeat." And speaking of Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, the article says, quote, he was clearly disturbed by his own inclusion, talking about being included on Signal. Democrats have lined up to accept this framing. Chuck Schumer and the leaders of several relevant Senate subcommittees, for example, sent a letter to Donald Trump expressing, quote, extreme alarm about, quote, the astonishingly poor judgment. Now, highlighting the weak response from Democrats, it says, this is the kind of story that liberals love because it gives them a chance to preen about process and seriousness and display their patriotic zeal about national security. In short, everyone is fighting about whether the incompetence on display was disqualifying. The 53 dead people barely enter into the equation. So Jacobin's main argument here is that agreeing with Republicans on fundamental issues while quibbling over process is a big part of what's gotten us to this point in our politics, which I think is a fair and likely correct point, but it's not the only point to be made about this story. When I had Amanda read this article, do you remember your first reaction to it?
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I was going to say today. Like, I just think it's kind of like, okay, your expectation of Democrats is like really high when they've never, like for decades and decades, ever expressed any feeling or care about anybody in the Middle East. Like, that's ridiculous to even expect it. It's not that this article bothers me because I think this is true and important to call out. I think there should be people calling out this issue or this lack of any care about human life. But our politicians, with the exception of a few, have always been this way. Like, they're hardwired American imperialism mindset. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's all of them, right? So like, most are never going to criticize a military mission, no matter what it did or what happened. And, you know, even one by Trump and company, like they're just not. And I feel like a lot of Democrats and older journalists are still like scarred from the post 9/11 and Iraq war years and feel like they still need to beat this military drum. And especially now when the Trump administration is going after veterans, Democrats are going to focus on the fact that the SignalGate thing could have led to American soldiers dying. Like, of course they are. Of course they are. And like, I think they're sincere when they say that. I don't think that's like bullshit. But if you're a member of Congress, like your relationship with Americans in uniform is much different than everyone else. Like, morality is not top of mind when it comes to these conversations. So like, I guess my expectations are in the ground for something like this.
This one got me as worked up as any of the articles because I do feel like, yes, it's kind of the same thing with, is Trump a Russian puppet or is he not a Russian puppet? Does it matter because the results are the same? Mm-hmm. Are Democrats war hawks or are they capitulating to the military industrial complex? Who cares? Doesn't matter. That's what happens. The fact that this story took hold and became a major story because of the goofiness of it is so frustrating to me, that we have grown so callous as maybe as a country that's what breaks through. Not the 53 people that were killed and mentioned in the article, not the
apartment building.
Yeah, the apartment buildings, just the way it was discussed in the chain among those people, where they said, yeah, we got the missile guy. Again, due process. Who the fuck knows? Let's not take their word for it. But they killed him by blowing up a building that his girlfriend was in. His girlfriend probably not involved in anything. Who knows how many other people died in that one apartment building? Because they say 53, whatever. I don't know, but like that's not part of the story. And JD Vance's response was excellent, which I heard said in a whatever that character, the Simpsons character, Burns.
Oh,
Mr. Burns.
Mr. Burns.
Yeah, and in the Mr. Burns voice.
Yes.
Excellent. Yes, like a super villain way. But It's so callous because it's on the other end and they're not really people. They're terrorists. And that was what always the fear coming out of after 9/11 is when the you're with us or against us rhetoric really kicked up and calling people terrorists. This is what people on the left has always talked about. This was always going to happen. We were just going to call everyone we didn't like terrorist. And depending on who was in power, it could be you here. Now it's come home, and they're calling people here terrorists who are protesting things that are happening in the Middle East. I can't get over the fact that right now, a big part of the people that are being deported from this country, the college activists, are being deported for the crime of saying that genocide is bad, that we should stop doing genocide, that we should stop supporting genocide. And there are plenty of Democrats who are on that side who have lost the high ground to say that we shouldn't be doing that, because they kind of agree that you shouldn't be able to protest this genocide in particular. That a lot of the things that are happening in that Signal thread would have been done exactly the same way under Joe Biden, under Obama,
Yep.
under Clinton, under Jimmy Carter. You can go all the way back. It's the same thing over and over again. And I think we've lost sight of the fact that we live in an imperial country, and that is a huge part of the problem. And we do have to address that. And right now, as we're recording this, they're talking about Pete Hegseth and Trump making sure that we have $1 trillion budget for the military.
Yep.
Meanwhile, they're cutting food programs. They're trying to steal Social Security. That's what this group is about. And on the surface, the Democratic Party is opposed to some of it, but functionally, they are just aligned with it. I bet most of them will vote for the $1 trillion budget. And that's the problem. And that's why we say, that's why it's a cliche that until everyone's free, no one's free. Until Palestinians are free, no one's free. Until Yemeni people are not being bombed on a daily basis, none of us are free. That's the issue that's at the core of this. But the only way to break through to most people is look how stupid they are. They're using Signal. They added a journalist. Ha ha. It's a clown show. That's not the issue. And that's like,
No.
and maybe that's the expectation, but I don't think that should be the expectation.
They're dumb and dangerous. It's both. And like, I think we have a tough time taking that in or something when we respond to these stories. Like, they're evil, dangerous people who are racist and like could give a shit about human life that is not who they deem to be worthy. And like, I wish we lived in a world where the morality of our actions was like a topic that was deemed worthy of discussion. But we've been supporting a genocide for years. And like, you still have Democrats not even wanting to have that conversation. So I feel like Erin said this last time, like she feels like she comes off callous sometimes about things. Like, I feel like I'm coming off like kind of callous in my reaction to this, but it's because I have no expectation that these people are going to be better. I have none.
So I actually have a different take than you all, which is going to be surprising considering you just referenced what I said. I refuse to adjust my expectation, because if you don't meet that, that means you're not up for the job. And I think what is evident is there are a lot of Democrats that are not up for the job that they are being paid to do. Like, we're watching our branches of government break down, and Congress is okay with the fact that there are war plans being made. I don't give a shit that it happened on Signal. I care that it happened at all. They're not running. We're not in active war with this country, and you're just okaying these. And the Democratic response is, oh, look at you all discussing this on Signal, instead of the fact that this has not been ran through Congress. And that is their role. So all of these Democrats that are going to cry as their power continues to dwindle, it is really hard to feel bad for you when you're cowering too. And I strongly believe that we have to take primaries super serious, because I do think that there are people who are making it so obvious that they did not sign up for the fight that is ensuing in front of us. And if we don't get the right people in place, we aren't going to have a Congress to push in order to take some of the power, in order to offer some checks and balances.
Well, it turns out you're all wrong, because if you don't subscribe to the all of the above theory of criticism, then you're not at least entirely right. So this whole show, we've been talking about the importance of multiple perspectives and how framing gets used to narrow the scope of the discussion, right? So the mainstream scope of the discussion is they're clowns, the end. They're silly for using Signal, and they're dumb. you widen that out a little bit and you're like, right, but I mean, there are real consequences for their actions. Shouldn't we be paying attention to that as well? And then Timothy Snyder, authoritarianism expert, wrote on his Substack, SignalGate violating national security. And it sounds like he's going to go the like Jeffrey Goldberg national security route, but he takes it in such a better direction that is so important to have be part of the discussion. So he opens with an explanation of the traditional argument made by governments that, sometimes we just have to violate your civil liberties in order to create a greater safety for you as a citizen, right?
Patriot Act.
And then he contrasts that with the arguments being made for the use of Signal rather than official government systems. And he says, quote, with this new scandal, we have tipped over into something different, compromising national security in order to preserve a tool which is used chiefly to violate the rights of Americans, end quote. Now, what rights are being violated, you might ask? The rights of those Yemenis to live, maybe, but, it's how's it impacting us? And so referring to habeas corpus, the fundamental principle that the government must have a good reason for detaining our physical bodies, Snyder says, quote, we have a number of laws, such as the Federal Records Act, whose purpose is to make sure that we know what our government is doing. It is not just that we want them to have a reason for seizing our bodies. It is that we want to be able to head off the kind of government that would plot to do such a thing for tyrannical reasons. This logic of freedom and tyranny is why government officials, such as those on the Signal chat, are required to record their interactions. Michael Waltz, who initiated the conversation, had the Signal messages set to self-delete. This is a violation of the Federal Records Act and other applicable laws, whose underlying purpose is to protect people from a conspiring government. So, sort of summing this up, Snyder says, using Signal enables American authorities to violate the rights of Americans. Signal is attractive not because it is secure with respect to foreign adversaries, which it is not, but because it is secure with respect to American citizens and American judges. The auto-delete function which Mike Waltz was using violates the law, but what is most essential is the purpose of that law, to protect the rights of Americans from their government. The timed deletion function allows American officials to be confident that their communications will never be recorded and that they can therefore conspire without any chance of their actions being known to citizens at the time or at any later point. So, maybe that's not what they had in mind exactly when they decided to use Signal in violation of existing law intended to guard against authoritarian abuse of power, but it will be a side effect.
I just want to say, I'm not wrong because I'm the one that sent you all this article.
Zing.
Timothy Snyder blew my mind with this, and we're always trying to see around the corner and see what else is going on or what else could be the next repercussion of some action or whatever. And he just does such a good job of this because this is his whole beat, and he's exactly right. Whether or not they're doing this intentionally, again, dumb versus evil, it is violating the American public. And I think what Snyder makes so clear is that, and we've all seen it, they came out and did this song and dance about nothing's classified, don't worry about it, They changed the narrative of that conversation very quickly and made it so that anybody being concerned started to sound silly. And I don't know how effective that was in terms of the people feeling that way, but certainly in the news media, this story dialed down real fast. It was huge and then it was gone. And I do feel like it's because they kind of won that narrative with what are you asking us questions for? Same thing that we were talking about earlier. You don't have the right to ask these questions. We're in charge of everything. You have no business here. That shutdown of the whole thing, again, whether or not they're trying to be authoritarians or not, they are. And that is an authoritarian response to, we have totally violated all the laws and rules. Now, is it also horrific that they killed people, innocent people? Yeah, But like, we have to find a way, as Jay was saying, like holding all of these things, all of these angles together at once, and not giving too much weight to one or the other necessarily, because they're all fucking bad and they all lead us down a path of, well, really bad shit. There's really no other way to say it.
I think why it was so easy to shut down is because of the mainstream narrative of, look at these clowns. We already know they're clowns. That part is like, at this point, like dog biting man, not man biting dog story. Like, yeah, they're stupid. So they can play into it, go with it, lie about it, and move on. The real meat of the story, we're not ready to deal with. And we're not ready to deal with the first version where they talk about the atrocity being committed and how callously it's being talked about, or the fact that they're doing the, this is the Marjorie Taylor Greene version, like you said. How dare you ask me this question? Mm-hmm. How dare you expect me to record my conversations to be held accountable at any point? That's not what we're doing here. And I brought up earlier when we were talking about the deportations that Timothy Snyder was the one that had the argument. Like, if you are arrested and they say that you are not a citizen and you don't have due process, how do you prove that you're a citizen? You cannot. So by using Signal instead of by using government issued devices, they're saying we don't have to follow rules. We make the rules. Yep. We are the deciders. There are no outside people to rule that we are making mistakes, that we are in charge. That's it. The solution to all of this has always been more democracy. And the problem is the Democratic Party completely cedes any kind of democratic procedure when it crosses our borders into dropping bombs. There is no habeas corpus. There is no due process. There is none of that for the bombs that are dropped on people in the Middle East specifically. It just doesn't come up. And because it doesn't come up, it can come back here, and there isn't a discussion about it because it's just normalized and accepted. And I understand, Amanda, where you're coming from. Like, having no expectations of these people is I mean, why would we?
Yeah.
But we have to, because I mean, it's what is it? The bigotry of low expectations, like used in a racial context. But if we have low expectations of Democrats, they're never going to do any better. Like, we have to. Yeah.
I'm happy to yell at them, just to be really, really clear here. Like, I don't expect them to do the right thing. I absolutely have expectations about what they should be doing.
Right.
And that we should yell at them over it. Yeah.
And like what Erin said, though, is yelling at these particular Democrats, I think, what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely.
But primarians and people that are accountable to us.
And I think it's the person versus the seat, right? What, Amanda, you're saying is that person in particular that's sitting in that seat, I do not expect them to do X, Y, Z. But I'm not going to change my expectation of the seat just because you happen to be sitting in it. And I know who you are as a person. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to push. And I know you agree with this. And I think that I love this show because we're going to clarify, because we don't want to misrepresent anyone's point. So for clarity, I think we all agree on this. But
I think Amanda's
I will
a fascist.
stand on.
Oh.
Whoa.
Sorry. For clicks, we got to have argument for clicks. That's the key.
Shit.
But I think another thing about SignalGate is we could easily do the same thing. We could be like, oh, they're clowns, and not do the analysis. And, some might think that we're going too deep in it. But what I see are the themes that are coming together. I see the impunity, them ruling, not feeling like they have to be accountable, Trump feeling like he has a mandate, that every policy that he even just agrees with. I mean, the Signal thing, like, if he's okay with it, there's not a huge response from Trump talking about his cabinet being morons talking on Signal. Like, there's no response on that kind of level. And it's because, we have a mandate. Like, if we want the messages to delete because we're talking about these things, we have the right to do so. I love all the themes that come together, even in something that seems so easily dismissed, of like, okay, so this is a drop in the bucket of ridiculousness coming out of their administration. But when you analyze deeper, you see all the threads, you see all the conversations that we've been having for weeks.
And speaking of holding the cabinet accountable in some way or another, Timothy Snyder wrote another piece called shadow cabinet. He's not the only one, and this has been a point of discussion to some degree. But to first explain in modern context, shadow cabinet sounds pretty sinister. It's like something QAnon would come up with. But to shadow someone literally just means to follow them around. And so to have a shadow cabinet means for the opposition party to assign members to shadow the elected and appointed cabinet of the government to provide criticism and an alternate perspective to the press. Always there, always available at a moment's notice. And here are some of the highlights from Timothy Snyder saying, quote, "A shadow cabinet would remind us of how much better things can be. The regular reactions of its members to Musk-Trump would flow from a different sense of politics and policy. That is material that the press needs and that we all need. Simply by virtue of not being oligarchic, shadow cabinet members remind us of the variety of Americans and the variety of their perspectives. Their proposals will show that we could act together on behalf of the interests of the people, broadly conceived. Oligarchy is incompatible with democracy, and a shadow cabinet will remind us of the difference. Members of a shadow cabinet, simply by doing their jobs, will help us to see that there is nothing inevitable about government by the very rich and the very wrong." And then this is the key point that fundamentally understands how the media works and how certain messages get privileged over others. He says, quote, "When the government does something outrageous, the government always gets to set the tone. It will be hard for journalists to be ready for every shocking moment. Without recourse to readily available political expertise, journalists will be reduced to writing that critics say or critics counter. But what if the critics had names and faces and expertise and ambitions and political responsibility?" So that's, I think, a well-made argument. The New Republic wrote a very similar one. Democrats send in the shadow cabinet. And this writer actually tries to explain why Democratic leaders are so ill-equipped for this moment, basically saying that in a parliamentary system, the leader of a party is much better suited to be the face in front of cameras. Whereas in our system, House and Senate leaders, it says, are chosen by their peers for a set of really specific qualifications. They need to be good at counting noses, corralling votes, and getting stuff passed. That is, they're elected largely because of skills that come into play when the party has the majority, because that's when they're important. That doesn't necessarily make them the best outwardly focused face of the party types. And so bouncing from that analysis, they then argue that a shadow cabinet would and should be made up of people who are good at being the face of the party, are good at being in front of the camera, making their points compellingly and with passion and with details and facts and so forth. They argue that it should be staffed with people who can like dig into obscure areas of like the Federal Register for things that are happening in the administration but are not in the headlines, and that this could actually end up being a tool for transparency and accountability, which would be nice. But then, like almost equally important, they need to be able to get in front of cameras as often as possible and create content. Because unfortunately, we're not just in a trade war, we're not just in hyperpolarization war, we're in a content creation war. That's how people get their news. And so if Democrats or anyone on the left wants their opinion to even be absorbed by people casually using the internet, it has to be made in a compelling way. And for reasons just explained, obviously, people like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are not the people to be the face of the opposition party right now.
So as I was reading Timothy Snyder's article about this, I kept writing notes, and then the next paragraph he would answer, like give a detailed explanation of what I was just noting, like maybe I had a question about. And one of them in particular was the effect on the media. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about how much deferring to authority journalists have been doing. I don't know if you want to pull up that media manipulation jingle, but it'd be a good time for it.
We'll do it in post.
If you say the words according to police and regurgitate what they said unquestioningly, that's not journalism, it's stenography.
there's a lot of stenography going on. And it's not even that I am that, like, I'm sympathetic to that because it is a full on fire hose, and media entities around the country are struggling with resources. So it's not crazy that that is happening. But this is Trump's obviously imposed feature because he wants to overwhelm everyone. The whole administration does. But if it took a lot less legwork to get counter information because it was pre-researched for them by the opposition and pre-presented, like, that would really help. That would make sure that some of these outlets who don't have the resources to do all the additional expert interviews and context and everything that we need to really understand what's going on, I mean, that would be great. It would kind of be like preset. And I've actually been seeing some good reporting around the Supreme Court decision over the Venezuelan men who've been effectively kidnapped. And the headlines sucked. Let me just say that in particular. And most of the reporters don't write those headlines. That's all done by the, editors and people at the top. But the articles themselves, if you read them, actually were extremely helpful and explained the nuance and details of that decision, and interviewed other people and gave full context. We need that for everything. And that's going to be difficult unless you have some sort of starting point, because you still have to fact check and you still have to do your own reporting. But if you got a base for what the other side is saying, that would be incredibly helpful to journalists.
I'm just thinking about like the Sullivan case and kind of the war that's been going on with media. One of the benefits of this that I thought of that wasn't specifically mentioned is that it does offer some cover for media outlets who are reporting on this, because instead of the information that they're providing to counter the argument being scanned and combed over, looking for any inconsistencies to then take them to court, right, and say they're misrepresenting, they would be quoting representatives of the Democratic Party. It would offer some kind of safeguard also for those media to report out on it. So I do think like that there's a little bit of cover that it might offer, which obviously is a benefit because a free press, I mean, is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, we get to end on good news in the form of a press release from the DNC, which I don't think I've ever said before and don't expect to say again anytime soon. Today, DNC Chair Ken Martin announced the launch of the People's Cabinet, a new project from the DNC that will leverage a deep bench of qualified policy experts, national and local leaders, as well as community voices who, all working together, will cut through the lies and speak directly to the American people about the reality of the Trump administration's reckless and dangerous agenda. How well they're going to pull that off, we're not going to discuss because we're going to end on a high note. But I think it is unequivocally positive that they are trying to do exactly what authoritarian experts and progressives who understand the need to adequately counter the Trump administration, like that is what those people are advocating for, and they're actually doing it. They're going to try, and I'll take that. I'll take that win.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by some of the names on the list thus far, but I'm hoping it'll be kind of evolving. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We can only hope. We can hope for the best.
And I'm sure we'll come back to give an update, critique this at a later time if it continues on.
Or we'll come back and say how well it worked and how everything's better now.
Yay!
Most
that would
likely.
be nice.
No. All right, did we solve it today? Multiple perspectives are important to your personal understanding of the world and also the continuation of democracy. I think that's the answer for the most part.
Sounds good to me.
I was about to say, it seems pretty simple and straightforward.
Solved.
Awesome. All right. So, make sure to diversify your media diet because you can't trust one source to give you all the relevant perspectives, unless that source is the Best of Left podcast, which curates all the needed perspectives you need. You thought you've been watching a discussion of political analysis, but actually this has been an ad for Best of Left all along. Welcome to YouTube, motherfuckers. If you have any ideas on how to better manage your media diet or save democracy with the power of an informed public, you can leave us a message, text or voicemail at 202-999-3991. And send us a message on Signal, the infamous Signal, at bestofleft.01 is our handle, or you can send an email to j@bestofleft.com. Thanks for listening. Remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most. It's extremely important to get a wide range of perspectives so that it's possible to understand a wider range of possible explanations for events in the world rather than fall into a sort of tunnel vision, whether that tunnel vision be mainstream or fringe.
They say the story's simple, but it's never black and white. Truth hides in shadows, not just in the light. Tariffs suit the powerful, making others pay. Trump threatens to push the button, demanding all obey. Keep your eyes open, your mind even more. Question everything, but keep your feet on the floor. There's a line between skeptic and cynic gone wild, between seeking the truth and being beguiled. We need every angle to uncover what's true. Not just one perspective, but many in view. Connect the dots carefully, don't draw what's not there. Finding the truth takes caution and care. Why crash the system? Control is their aim. Hardship breeds power, and power's their game. Scarcity's a weapon to keep dissent at bay, a strategy to ensure they always hold sway. Keep your eyes open, your mind even more. Question everything, but keep your feet on the floor. There's a line between skeptic and cynic gone wild, between seeking the truth and being beguiled. We need every angle to uncover what's true. Not just one perspective, but many in view. Connect the dots carefully, don't draw what's not there. Finding the truth takes caution and care. SignalGate's not just about texts swept away. They're dodging accountability at the end of the day. When leaders hide actions they don't want us to see, what's clearly at risk is our liberty. Opposition matters, it's democracy's core. A people's cabinet to balance the score. Not just the powerful commanding the stage, but voices that cut through the noise and the rage. We need every angle to uncover what's true. Not just one perspective, but many in view. Connect the dots carefully, don't draw what's not there. Finding the truth takes caution and care. The details are clear, we know what to do. It's time to take action and see it through. The dots are connected, the path is in sight. Rise up together and fight for what's right.